Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out Podcast. I'm Adam Koralik. This is for June 2018. Welcome as always. So obviously, as per usual, this is early access for Patreon backers. However, if you're not a Patreon backer, that's no problem. You're presumably listening to this later in the month. If you want to join my Patreon at any time, you can get this video right away when it's the day it's recorded. You also get early access to regular videos, and there's other perks over there you can go check out. If not, no big deal. Either way, let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about on this podcast is... So at the time I record this, E3 is right around the corner. And of course, when the majority of you listen to this, E3 will have already happened. So we're not going to talk too much about the specifics of games. It's more like what I wanted to talk about in this instance was the whole thing with leaks. Prior to E3, there's been a whole ton of leaks coming out. And I see a whole lot of people, making videos saying things like, does E3 still even matter? Like, is this a huge problem? And then I know firsthand, because I do work in this industry, believe it or not, that it gets frustrating for a lot of these PR people, like that they want to keep a game secret, and then it gets like spoiled by like the dumbest thing. So like for example, Ubisoft was gonna reveal Assassin's Creed Odyssey at their conference. And then just a photo of a promotional piece of, a keychain, I think it was what it was, got out there, and then that like basically leaked it. So then Ubisoft kind of had to own it and then like release a trailer and all this stuff just to kind of get ahead of it. That sucks. That must suck for them. And it sucks for all these other companies when stuff like that happens. Same thing happened with Sega. I can tell you this one now. So Sega told me quite some time ago, when I was with them for the Shenmue thing, in Japan, They told me like, yeah, we're working on this like new Sonic racing game, and it's going to be at E3. It's going to be like our big reveal and all that stuff. And it's like, oh, that's really cool. But I don't remember which company, some retail outlet accidentally posted like the box art of the Switch version. And then Sega had to get in front of it and jump out there and be like, yes, here it is. And then they showed footage of it, and it's not a secret anymore. And I feel really bad for companies like that because, they're trying to make E3 exciting. That's what we like about E3 is the I don't know what's coming next. And so all those leaks, man, I can see why that's really frustrating because it really does take a lot of the fun out of it. But it might be one of those things where it might be kind of unavoidable. I mean, we live in such a digital era now. Like, you tweet, some random guy finds something, tweets about it, and like the whole world can know in a second. Keeping stuff secret is really hard. And then sometimes you just have entire corporations like screwing up. Like a while ago, and this is very dated information now, but a while ago, I'm sure a lot of you remember that Walmart Canada accidentally published a leak of 15 games, some of which were real, some of which were not. But it's kind of insane that continues to be a problem. But I really don't think there is much of a solution to that because one could argue, well, why don't they just not tell anybody? Well, the problem is you need that engine has to work. The second the game is announced, they want you to be able to go to Amazon or Best Buy or whatever and be able to pre-order it, which means Amazon and Best Buy have to know about it. So since the more people know about it, the more likely leaks are, and that's unfortunately what keeps happening. And I don't think there's any real solution to it. It's just kind of do your best to play it close to the chest. Sometimes that works. Like when we did at Sega Fest, when we did the Shenmue reveal, we played that extremely close to the chest. I mean, I say we, like Sega played it close to the chest, and they included me, obviously, but, I knew not to talk about it. I didn't even mention I was going to Japan for that trip. I kept that shit super secret until it was just like, all right, now I can talk about it. And there's still a bunch of things I still can't talk about. It's like, but, not everybody signs an NDA. And not everybody even recognizes what they're doing as a secret. Like, I'm sure whoever the web employee was at Walmart Canada probably didn't even realize you weren't supposed to, that stuff was a secret. It's just like, okay, these are the SKU numbers I got to plug in today, or whatever. It's unfortunate. It's just kind of how it goes, but it is what it is. And it sucks though. I really wish there was some solution to that because it does ruin the show. I mean, fundamentally it does. I mean, because you get too much information in advance, and then when you go back and when you watch these events for the first time, obviously, you're like, yeah, we know. So the intended excitement is not there, and I genuinely feel for these guys because I know so many of these dudes in PR, and that's their whole job is just to to find a way to make those things exciting, and they try so hard to do it, and then some company somewhere that has nothing to do with them accidentally ruins the whole thing, and you can't put the cat back in the bag, basically, and that's too bad. E3 in general, obviously at the time I record this, has not happened yet, but I will be going, or I went, I should say. So to those of you who are on my Patreon, look forward to some videos. I will be doing as much coverage there as I can of press events. I will be going to certain conferences. I have a bunch of meetings with various people that I know over there. And, you know, of course, to the majority of you, I hope you watched my E3 coverage, and I hope you liked it, and I hope the show went well. You guys know better than I do, because at the time I record this, I don't know. But, yeah, it'll be fun to go back. That'll be my second E3. And I'm very excited about it, so I'm really looking forward to it. But it's hard to say much else about this right now, because you already at this point in time, the majority of you would have already seen my primary E3 reactions, and last month I did my predictions, so there's not really much else to say other than just what I said about the leaks. And hopefully there were some pretty good surprises in there. That's really all I can say left about that. So we're going to move on to our next subject here, which is just a brief little blurb. Because there's not a whole lot to say because I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But I just wanted to point out that Arrested Development Season 5 is out now. And I think that's very awesome that Arrested Development keeps coming back like that. I know the show's in a little bit of hot water because of everything with Jeffrey Tambor. He plays the father. He had, let's say, Harvey Weinstein-esque allegations. I don't know how that's played out, but that happened at a very bad time for them, so promoting a show with him in it, difficult. If it gets a 6th season, he may not be part of it. I don't know. Now, I haven't seen the show yet, but I've seen the first 4 seasons, and I'm excited that there is a 5th season. I just like that Netflix is kind of resurrecting shows like that, although I have to admit, I didn't really enjoy the 4th season very much. I liked the first 3. The 4th one, I felt like what they did with it was that they took the fact that they were on Netflix to try and make that a plot point. Let me rephrase. The first 3 seasons, I wouldn't call them episodic, but they kind of were, in the sense that they could basically function on their own, even though there was an overarching story kind of tying them together, because they were designed for broadcast television, which makes sense. When they got to the season 4, which was the first Netflix season, they basically created an arcing show that is absolutely mandatory to watch every single episode. And they changed the structure. Rather than having episodes that each character has a plot line, an A story, a B story, and to some extent a C story, they basically just decided to do episodes entirely devoted to one character with little references to other episodes, and then you kind of saw how they all tied together later. It was a creative way to go, but I feel like that structure doesn't really work with comedy. It works more with drama. And I know because I've done some of it, or I shouldn't say it doesn't work with comedy. It doesn't work with that type of comedy, that basically situational comedy. I've done some of that with, you know, Game Society and our show Skyrim for Pimps. I like tying things together and making stuff fit, but that was a little too much. But maybe upon rewatching it, I'll differ my opinion, because I'm going to rewatch all of this in anticipation for season 5. Did any of you guys watch Arrested Development? Did you enjoy it? You know, did you guys like it back in the day? And the other part of this isn't so much about Arrested Development itself, so much as I love the idea that Netflix has this power to resurrect shows. And if I could give them, you know, a suggestion, I'd say Futurama. Though Futurama has been resurrected so many times, I just don't know if there's anything left there. But I know Netflix expressed interest in it at one point. So, you know, who knows? Maybe they could do that. But fun fact about Arrested Development, getting back on that for just a moment. A lot of episodes of that were directed by the Russo brothers, aka the guys who made Infinity War and some of the Captain America movies. Actually, I mentioned this in a different podcast, but in case you missed it, in Avengers Infinity War, there's a scene where Thanos is in the room of the Collector, and there's all sorts of like random aliens and stuff back there. One of them is Tobias Funke, all decked out in blue, like he was in the Blue Man Group. Tobias Funke being played by David Cross. And the reason for that is the Russo brothers directed, like I said, they directed episodes of Arrested Development where Tobias Funke was a character. And then, of course, they directed that movie. So I mentioned this before. It's funny to think that the Arrested Development universe could arguably be considered canon with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not that there's any reason to connect them other than that. It was obviously just a visual gag, but to think that the Arrested Development everyday modern day universe is eventually where, you know, Spider-Man and Thanos and all that shit, they're all going to show up. That's kind of funny. And that's what Arrested Development just was. It was funny, you know, it was a fun show. So hopefully it continues. But my guess is with all that Jeffrey Tambor stuff, if they do a 6th season, he won't be involved. But I don't know. Again, I haven't watched the 5th season, so I can't say anything else about it at this point. So I'll give you guys kind of an update on that whenever I get around to seeing it. So let's move on. This subject here, it was brought to us by Kyle Vaughn. You guys remember him? Kyle Vaughn's been out for a while, but he's back. So welcome back, Kyle Vaughn. He is at the level of the podcast or the Patreon supporters where he gets to choose a subject every month. You know, if you want to, you can choose a subject. You can be on this podcast if you want to, chat with me, hang out. You can get a shout out, which that will be coming later, or just early access. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of benefits if you want to sign up on Patreon. But again, completely up to you. But in this case, Kyle gets to pick a subject. Now, he actually just typically, and that's what he did this month, he typically lets me choose that for him. So I thank you for that very much, Kyle. But let's go ahead and this is what I thought of. I wanted to talk about something more not news related, just kind of word vomit. You know, I was just kind of thinking about this to myself. And then I thought, okay, maybe we could just discuss that out loud and see where it goes. But basically, I want to pose a question to you guys. Do you play a game to completion, or do you just play it to get through the story? Now, when we're playing a video game, what I mean by that is, depending on the type of game, and depending on how much you like it, you will play it more and try to, you know, maybe get all the achievements, or you'll try to get all of the little random collectibles or whatever. And then some games you're just kind of like, yeah, I just kind of want to get through this just to see how it ends. Then there's other games. Let me give you some examples. There are some games where I have 100% of them. You know, like I will play every aspect of them, trying to earn every single bit. And some of those games would include things like Far Cry 4. I did that with. You know, I went all around Kirat and I did every single little mission. I unlocked everything because I fell in love with that game. I just loved it. And I know Far Cry 4 isn't everyone's favorite. I know everybody says like Far Cry 3. Unfortunately, I haven't played that one yet. I know. Shame on me. But Far Cry 4 was how I was introduced to that series, and I just absolutely loved it. I did the same thing with Primal, but Far Cry 4 was really where I spent more time. I obviously have done that to death with Shenmue. I've played through both of those games like a million times, just trying to do everything. Although I have to admit, the second game still is so big and expansive to me that I've spent a lot less time exploring it. One of the problems with Shenmue, this is just a side point, is once you know what to do, it's a hard game to find yourself explore in, because, you know, like one of the points of that game was to try and appeal to people who have never played it. So like you're playing detective, you're trying to figure out where you need to go, what you need to do, who you need to talk to, and you just have to kind of gather information that way. And then when you really don't know what you're doing, you'll see a whole bunch of other cutscenes that most people who know what they're doing will never see, except for the really devout members of the Shenmue community who intentionally try to dig out those cutscenes. But there's a whole lot of strange cutscenes that are only unlocked in certain ways that, as a player, I would naturally never find because I would have to specifically look for them. But some players find them just by accident because that's, you know, they don't know what they're doing. And I kind of envy that because I kind of wish I didn't know what I was doing with Shenmue, particularly Shenmue 2, because that one has a lot more content that I've just never, like, there's so many buildings in that game I've never been into or never had any reason to, because there's like entire empty rooms, like, but you're like, well, what's the point of that? Well, there isn't. It's just exploration. But with Shenmue 1, you know, like I can tell you confidently, like, oh yeah, go here, go there, do that, all this. But Shenmue 2 is more like, I mean, I know where to go for plot points, but there's so much of that game, like I still get lost in it. Like sometimes when I'm wandering around as Rio and all that. But my point is, I've played that game a lot. I've played it to 100%. I've gotten all the way through it. I've seen everything in it ultimately. And that's just one of those type of games. Another one, this is a strange example, but this is going to be kind of a theme here. Call of Duty 2, my favorite Call of Duty game, which I loved the crap out of that game. I beat everything in it. I got, you know, all 1,000 achievement points, even that super hard veteran mode one. I just absolutely loved that game. It was my introduction to that franchise, and it's been basically downhill since there, in my opinion anyway. But keep in mind, I don't play multiplayer. But those are some games, just a couple of examples. I'm not saying, well, other than Shenmue, that's obviously my favorite game, but I'm not saying those are like my favorite games of all time or anything like that. I'm just saying that those are games that I found when I was playing them. I had this great desire to do everything in them. Then there's the next tier, which is basically you play it for the story, just to kind of get through it. You don't really explore every aspect of it. You just kind of want to know how this thing goes. Another, like I said, we were just talking about Call of Duty. A different Call of Duty that I did that with was Call of Duty World at War. Now, I know that one a lot of people hated, but they hated it for multiplayer reasons. When you play the single player stuff, that shit was actually fun, especially because you don't get a whole lot where it's America versus Japan World War II games. I mean, you get them, but not with the prevalency you do with against the Germans, basically. But I liked that game a lot. I thought that was a lot of fun, but I basically just kind of played through it just to play through it and then get the story and be like, oh, that's cool. That's how it went, you know. And I didn't really ever feel any great need to go back and look for everything, see what kind of intel or whatever I missed or any of that stuff. Quake 4, another example of that. You know, I played that game all the way through, but I never went back and did everything. Actually, another one I just thought of that I did everything with was Prey. So it's not like it's, I mean, like I said, it is, first-person shooters are totally eligible. Like Prey, the first one, the original one that 2K made. I loved that game. I played that one all the way through, did everything. But then there's games that, like I said, I've played them through, but I just kind of get, you know, just to do it, like Golden Axe for the Genesis or Streets of Rage for the Genesis. Even though I know particularly Streets of Rage very well, I've never tried to like memorize like where every single, you know, like Apple or, you know, like dollar or like the money and stuff. Like I've never tried to do that. Like I've never been that obsessed with it. I just kind of go through it. And then a hilariously bad example would be a game like Turning Point. Do you remember that? That was a first-person shooter, very bad one. The premise is that it's an alternate reality where the Germans had successfully invaded the U.S. during World War II, and they'd taken over New York, and you were kind of taking New York back. I remember playing through that, just kind of laughing at how bad it was. It was kind of like a junk food movie type of thing, you know, just you're like, okay, I'm just gonna play this because it's just hilariously stupid, but you get all the way through it, you know what I mean? That's like a guilty pleasure game, but I only did it once. It was just to see how this fucker ends, you know. So there's that tier. Even though don't misconstrue, I'm not saying that Turning Point is some fucking great game and I loved it. You know, I'm not saying that. It's exactly the opposite. It was hilarious and I got through it because it was so bad. But it is a game I ultimately got through and I wanted to push through to see how it ended. And while some of those games are obviously quality, you know, you play a game all the way through for different reasons. Then there's the tier where you just kind of give up for one reason or another. Either you get bored, you get distracted, or whatever. Like, I was playing a game called Remember Me, which was a Capcom game. And I was into it, you know, I was playing it for a while, but then like halfway through it, it started becoming a chore. Like it was just a lot less fun to sit, like it felt like I was doing homework. Like I had to sit there and play, and I don't know quite why. Maybe it was incredibly repetitive, but not the right kind of repetitive, because you know, like something like, I'll admit it, you know, something like Far Cry 4 has a lot of repetition in it. It's a lot of like, go over there, kill that thing, bring it over here, do that, you know, like you get it, but that's the kind of grinding I can enjoy. Something about Remember Me's structure wasn't like that, and I don't know, I just didn't quite get into it. I didn't dislike the game, I didn't hate it, it was just kind of like, I just ironically forgot about it. You know what I'm saying? Like I just kind of gave up on it. Another example, we're getting, you know, going with the Call of Duty thing, Call of Duty Modern Warfare stuff. And I know a lot of people disagree with that because a lot of people love those games, but I don't. Because to me, Call of Duty was like one part solid gameplay and one part story to tell, and like history-based story. That's why I tend to prefer the ones that are, you know, based on some sort of real world events. Modern Warfare to me is annoying because it's all like their own fictional plot line that's just like, I don't know how to say this exactly. It just feels very esports. It feels like, you know, something made to appeal to people who love Madden more than anything else. And I'm not saying that you're like that if you enjoyed those games, because maybe you didn't give a shit about the storyline, you just played them for the gameplay. Like Call of Duty Ghosts was one of those too. Like the plot line was terrible, but the gameplay was fine. And that's the same with the Modern Warfare stuff. Like gameplay's fine, but it doesn't have the story or line to hook me, you know? I don't know. So that's kind of where I was with that. Like, I think I finished one of them. I think I finished the first one, and then I just tried the second, and I didn't even care. I don't even think I've ever tried the third one. There just wasn't enough interest there. I gave up part of the way through, basically. And then another one was like Dead Rising 4. So Dead Rising 3 was in that 100% tier. I went all the way through. I did everything in it. Although, funny enough, Dead Rising 1 and 2, I was at the give up stage. And this Dead Rising 4 was also the give up stage. And I don't really know why. I kind of never got into it. I tried it for a little bit, but I don't know. Maybe that's the whole point, though, is I'm basically saying, like, these are some games I've given up on, and I can't always identify why that would be. The next tier below that is I don't play them at all, even though they interest me. Things like Call of Duty World War II, like the new one they did like last year. Everything about that game looks solid. Like, I want to try it. I want to play it. I just haven't done it. Same with Doom, the remake, Super Mario Maker, Metal Gear Solid 3 even. Things like that where I'm just like, that looks like a fun game. I definitely want to play it, but I just haven't found the time to prioritize it and ever to get around to it. And of course, I basically asked the question, well, why is that? Other than the logistics of time, why haven't you done it? In the case of Call of Duty World War II, it's just that I don't own it. I haven't, got around to it. Doom's kind of the same thing. Super Mario Maker I do own, but I feel like that's the kind of game where it would just consume my life for too long, and I just don't have the time. And Metal Gear Solid 3, I really don't know what it was. I mean, to be honest with you, Metal Gear Solid 2 really kind of... I know people like that game, but I really didn't. I didn't like playing as, what's his name? Blonde guy. I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden, but I didn't enjoy playing as him, and ever since I've kind of had not much love for playing the franchise, other than Metal Gear Solid 1 I replayed a million times. Even the GameCube version I've played a million times. But I don't know. It's not like I'm opposed to sitting down and playing all the Metal Gear Solid games, but then I think about it that way. It's like, well, if I'm going to get into Metal Gear Solid 3, really what I should do is just play the whole thing all over again. And that's a big time commitment. So it seems like a lot of the time I don't play a game solely for time commitment. I have a very busy schedule, if you guys haven't noticed. But so I'm in that tier with those. And then you get to a state where there's entire games you just don't give a shit about. That's the fifth tier, in my opinion. You have things like, I don't care about DDR. I'm a chunky dude. I'm never going to sit down and play a whole ton of DDR. It's not going to happen. I'm not into music. Like that whole thing is just like, yeah, and then the collector part of me doesn't even like DDR, because dance pads are always these like giant things that are totally worthless and annoying to store. So I only have I have the Dreamcast one, just for Dreamcast reasons. I think I have an Xbox dance pad, but like most of those times those things are just junk that you find at like Goodwills and stuff. So I don't know, the DDR and all the music type of games, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, I mean, they're all kind of in that same group of, they're big, they take up a ton of space, they're not fun for me personally, they don't appeal to my interests at all, and I don't even enjoy music that much, so it's kind of like, it's really something I want nothing to do with, so I really don't care. Sports games kind of go into that same general area. Like sports games, I mean, it is kind of the gamer thing to do, to rip on sports games. I'm not doing it for that reason. The reality of the gaming industry is that sports games are bread and butter to a lot of companies like 2K and EA make a ton of money off those things, because the majority of people who own platforms, believe it or not, buy sports games. That's why they're so damn common. The thing is, they don't retain their value because they don't appeal to the niche audience that keeps retro stuff alive, such as myself. That's why sports games are always worthless. Unless they're like some rare incident where, the game was recalled or something like that. But yeah, sports games to me, even though I like sports, like actual sports, some of them, I like, basketball a lot. At the time I record this, I don't know who won the NBA finals yet. I know the Cavs are losing, to the Warriors. I hope the Warriors won, just cause I don't like, I've talked about this before, I don't like the fact that we've had this rematch 4 years in a row. But I guess between the two, I hope the Warriors won. Although but in the Final Four there, I was rooting for the Rockets. Anyway, doesn't matter. So I don't like American football, hand egg. I've never liked it. Baseball, believe it or not, I enjoy just fine. I wouldn't really watch it unless it was like some special reason. But to be honest, of all like sports type of games, The baseball ones to me were always the most fun. I don't know why, they just were. Basketball games, ironically, I've never found to be fun at all, other than Space Jam on PS1 and Saturn. I don't know, I love that, but that was just because that was Looney Tunes and Michael Jordan. But yeah, sports games in general, I've never had much of an affinity for, like a lot of us. And then the one I'm going to say that's very controversial to a lot of you, although I'm sure if you've been following me for a while, you know this, turn-based RPGs, things like your Final Fantasy and your Secret of Mana and all those type of things. I've just never been into it. It's just, I don't know what it is. I think it's partially the time dedication, the fact that I've never been much for fantasy, as well as the fact that I think when I started trying to play those as a kid, I was so used to your beat 'em ups, your Golden Axes, your Streets of Rage, things like that, that the idea that this character would just stop and have to like take turns in a fight just seemed so annoying to me. And as an adult, unfortunately, my opinion hasn't really changed on it much. But it's one of those things where I'm sure as an adult I could probably appreciate it more, but I'm kind of, this is going to sound weird, but I'm kind of glad that I don't. And I mean that in the best way possible, which is that, as mentioned above, I don't have much time for even the games I do want to play. So it's kind of nice that there's this whole subsect of gaming I just don't care about, because then it's something I just don't have to factor in. And I want it very clearly understood. I am not saying I hate RPGs, grr, they're so bad, Final Fantasy's the worst game ever. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm simply saying they don't appeal to my interests. And I'm so the 5 tiers, man. 100% completion, story and done. You give up halfway through. You never played it even though you want to, and you just don't care about it. Do you guys have some games in those tiers that interest you, or that you can think of that are like that? If you want to, I'd love to see people's opinions. Like, put the 5 tiers and then put like a couple examples next to it. I'm just curious how different people's minds work on this. And maybe if you feel like it, kind of explain yourself. Like, you know, why do you feel that way? Kind of like I did. You know, I just, gaming is a fundamentally interesting thing. There's so much about it you can discuss. And this to me is just another, you know, random subject. Basically, you're fundamentally asking why some piece of art was more interesting to you than another piece of art, and then trying to explain yourself. So that's pretty much all that is. So I hope that's a good discussion. I hope you guys are interested in that, and I look forward to hearing what you guys think about it. So thank you very much to Kyle Vaughn for sponsoring that. So moving on, this is just a short little story that I saw recently, although by the time majority of you hear this, but I don't think this is going to matter all that much. The story seemed to be kind of buried, so maybe a lot of you never even heard about it, now that I think about it. 2K is shutting down the Evolve servers on September 3rd of this year. So essentially what that means is the game is done. They're not supporting it anymore. The game was basically an online only game. So without that component, it really is a brick. Peer-to-peer connections will still work, and all your DLC will remain functional in that regard if you're playing peer-to-peer. The game did not have a single-player campaign, so it's essentially a coaster unless you're doing the peer-to-peer stuff. But basically, this is killing off the game. Now, Evolve's interesting. I actually have a story with Evolve, 2 stories. One, I was at PAX West in like 2014, 2015. I was at both of them. I just don't remember which year it was. But there was a time where I was out there with the entirety of my Game Society Pimps crew. And we hung out with at the time they were the 2 best friends play, now they're the super best friends play. All 4 of them were there. And we did this thing where Machinima and 2K had us together do a 4-on-4 of their team versus our team. We won all the matches. Woo! Yeah, that was how I was introduced to Evolve, and I remember thinking at the time, like, this is pretty fun, but it's too bad that like it requires all of these people to make that work. And so later I was actually invited to an event for Evolve, but I turned it down for kind of that reason. I was just like, the gameplay is fun, but it's very limited in that, you know, like once you run out of people, like there's not much else to do with it. And I guess the game, while it was successful, wasn't successful enough, because I mean, they're killing off. It's only been 3 years. Now I recognize that not all games have to cater to my interests, as we just discussed above, but this is one of those points I always make, warning people, especially younger people, about gaming. I grew up in a time where your video games were not expected to connect to the internet. They were expected to, when you put the game in the machine, it played, and that was it. That was the whole game. Now, as time went on, we started getting into patches and updates and DLC and all that fun stuff. But that also, with that came, online dependent games, online persistent world games. I know that was a bigger thing on PC for many more years. I'm very aware of that. But it's becoming a trend now, of course, where you build entire games that are only for that purpose. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know that. It's not like anybody's really surprised Evolved required an online connection. But what I want to stress here is that to a lot of younger people, you have to be aware that your games, a lot of the ones you like the best, if you like these online dependent games, will not be around for very long. They will not be around forever. The same thing goes for like patches and connections through, things like Xbox Live will at some point go down. When is anybody's guess. I mean, I think Xbox Live will be up for a while because especially I was shocked. I made a prediction a few years ago that was definitely wrong, that I thought they'd shut it down even this year. Granted, that was like 4 years ago I made that prediction. Because I didn't expect them to do Xbox 360 backwards compatibility. That's integrated. But at some point, those servers will go down. 360 servers will go down. Xbox One servers will go down. PS3 servers will go down. PS4 servers will go down. And when those happen, whenever that happens, all the content therein will go down except for the stuff that's survived by the community. The thing that they try to do with these games and these servers is basically wait until they get the least amount of negative reaction from the public about it. And the way you do that is to wean people off by just moving away and waiting till the community is nearly dead before they pull the trigger. The same thing happened this year with Nintendo and the WiiWare store. They took that down, but they basically waited until no one gave a shit about the Wii anymore. But just because nobody gives a shit, does that actually make their decision right? The answer is no, it doesn't, because you are fundamentally robbing people of those things. But that's why I always argue that digital content is not really property, because it can be taken away from you without your consent. You know what I mean? And if you are going to argue that digital content is property, then you also have to argue that what they're doing is theft. But no one makes that case. No one says that Nintendo is stealing from you when they disable their Wii servers. But essentially, if it's property, that is in fact what they are doing. So that's always the argument I use. But I guess what I'm saying is just be careful when you get into a game like this. It's fine if your whole thing is, I just want to play this game. I want to experience it while it's here, and then I'm ready to move on. I know a lot of people in, my own life that are like that. One of my other dudes on Game Society, Emery, he's very much like that. He's like, I just want to play it while it's here, and I don't care. Now, he for the longest time was my representation of PC gamers, which was to PC gamers was a huge insult, and I apologize for that, because he used to say really dumb shit that I was like, I guess that's what PC gamers think. But a lot of you corrected me on that, so I thank you for that. But he would say things like, when you game on PC, you just want to play a game once, and then you uninstall it and never touch it again, and it's considered garbage. And I was like, really? Okay, that's what PC gamers think. All right, well, that's weird. But a lot of you told me that's not true, so I'm glad. But that's not the point here. The whole point is just that be careful. Just know going in when you play a game, especially one like Evolve, where it had all sorts of financial inclusions, like all that DLC and stuff. Be aware that your investment is not a good investment if it's tied to a server. Let me put it that way. That in general is just good sense, though. So yeah, but I mean, I'm not telling you what kind of games to play. Play whatever the hell you want to play. But just know going in, there is a ticking clock element to any game that requires an online connection. So that was the point of that story. So moving on, we're going to do a round of shout outs here. So every single one of these people are obviously awesome people who sponsored the Patreon podcast. They're at the tier where they get the shout out. So I just want to thank all of you. So we got Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos. Rob Janos just got married, everybody. Congratulate him if you don't mind. Eric Perelez, who I believe is brand new. Trey Wagner, my buddy. And Tim Inman. So thank you guys, all of you. You guys are awesome. Thank you for helping to keep not only the podcast itself alive, but keeping the channel alive. It's very much appreciated. It seriously is awesome of all of you. So one more round there. Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Eric Perelez. You'll have to correct me on the pronunciation there, buddy. Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. Thank you very much, guys. So moving on, the next round of things we're going to talk about largely contains spoilers. So if you're unaware, in the description of this video, I have all the podcast subjects listed out, and then I have time code next to them. Feel free at any time to skip around to things you do or do not have an interest in. That's totally fine. But the ones below, you can see there's 4 remaining. The only one that won't have spoilers is Incredibles 2 / Jurassic World, because I haven't seen it at this point. We're just going to talk a little bit about it. But that said, let's get into the first one, which will contain spoilers. So recently I've had a little bit of extra downtime because I was supposed to go out to something, and that something was delayed, so I had cleared my schedule already and then had nothing to do. So my girlfriend's in town, so we decided we were going to sit down and just play some games. At this point in time, we played through 2. We played through Far Cry 5, which we'll talk about here in a second, and we played through BioShock, the collection. At least at the time of recording this, we're most of the way done with BioShock 1. I want to start there with BioShock. Now, my girlfriend has never played any of the BioShock games. I have. I've played them through before. And I was like, you're going to love this, babe. It's so good. She at first was kind of like, this is weird, and then she got into it and she was like, okay, this is fucking beautiful in like the saddest way possible. I love this is fantastic. But she was like, I don't know if I could actually play it. It's fucking too much with my senses, but I love watching it. And I've been playing the Xbox One collection version, which, funny enough, that was another 2K event I actually did go to. That was what I'm just gonna give you a side story here. There was a time I was invited to a BioShock Infinite or BioShock Collection event, as well as a Mafia 3 event. They were putting them out around the same time. And they had these 2 different events like a few days apart. And so the guy I know over there, who I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he would want me to, he contacted me and he was just like, hey, we're doing events for both these games. Do you want to go? And I said yes to both. And he was like, he replied, he's like, okay, so I'm just going to level with you. You were the only person who said yes to both. So there isn't much sense in flying you out here, having you come to an event, then sending you home and having you fly back like a day later. So if you want, we'll just do the schedule this way. And I was like, okay, sure. So it basically meant I would be out there for a few extra days, but I would be able to do both things. So I get to the BioShock event, which he said, oh, what we did was we did the real event yesterday. And today you're basically just you're doing the same content. It's just that nobody else is here. I was like, okay, cool. It's weird, but it's cool. So I'm inside of one of their hangars, which is, if you've ever seen 2K Studios, they're literally in old World War II hangars that Disney retrofitted into film production studios, then abandoned and sold to 2K. So that it's these really cool studios. But anyway, so they put me in a hangar there, all set up, and it's got an Xbox One and it's got the BioShock collection. And the way these events usually work is you have a lot of autonomy to record stuff and, kind of meander, go get some coffee, food, that type of thing. But this was less formal because I was the only one there. So they put me up there with the console and the TV and everything. And my guy just says, okay, so it's about, it's basically 9 now, and we're going to stop at around 5:30. We'll take a break for lunch at noon. So I guess just go ahead. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you just play for like that time. So basically I sat there and I played that collection for 7.5 hours or so, early access at the time. And it was a lot of fun. I remember falling in love with those games all over again. So unfortunately, since then, I hadn't had enough time to sit down and play it again. But now I've been doing that lately, and I just remember, like, damn, BioShock's a good game. It's such a good game. If you've never played it, you really owe it to yourself to get that collection. That's one of the best things ever. I think this is okay to talk about now. When it comes to the 3 games, the most of the work they did for the re-release, they put into BioShock 1. A, because it's the most infamous of the 3 games, but B, it was also the oldest, so it needed the most work. BioShock 2 and Infinite, they did basic cleanups on, but BioShock 1, they did a lot more work on. And yeah, those games are just so much fun, and I'm really enjoying playing those around. But believe it or not, the reason I bring up this game story is not just to talk about the game itself, even though it's fantastic, but I just want to touch on the whole concept of remasters and re-releases and stuff, because that's been such a weird issue I've been seeing floating around lately. It's not even that lately. It's been in the last couple of years. It was kind of more notorious at the beginning when a lot of people were upset that Tomb Raider, for example, got re-released so quickly onto next-gen platforms, or God of War 3. But I know a lot of people are upset because they don't like re-releases. They're like, we played all these games on 360 and PS3. I want, new content. I get all that, but my basic argument to that has always been, you don't have to buy it. That's the great secret. You vote with your wallet, Personally, I'm very much in favor of these collections because obviously in the cases like this, they do get a lot of additional upgrades and work on them. I mean, this collection contains all 3 games. It's relatively cheap. It was like $30 retail. And it includes all the DLC and stuff, all the patches. It's all built in. It's like, what's not to like? And then it's just more convenient to be able to play it on your modern console. And I say that as someone who's a retro gamer with all the retro stuff, and I still acknowledge it's way more convenient that way. Yes, it's fundamentally annoying that you have to then rebuy it. And I guess you can sell off your older ones if that's what you want to do. I get that side of it, but again, as I pointed out, you don't have to buy it. It's optional. So I've always been a fan of those things, as long as they're done competently. When they're done incompetently, like the Silent Hill HD collection with 2 and 3, then I see why people openly hate it, and that's deserved. But when they're done well, there's really no downside. It's just introducing the games to a new generation of people who missed that out. I mean, I know that's not why they're doing it. The obvious answer to why they're doing it is it's a quick buck. I mean, it's taking something that was popular or successful in the first place and essentially reselling it to you. I get that, but there do come benefits with that. Like the upcoming, I can only talk so much about this, but of course, Shenmue 1 and 2 being re-released. I'm very excited about that. The thing that excites me the most about that one, other than the fact that it's Shenmue, is the fact that so many people never got to play those games just because of the platforms they were on. I mean, I love the Dreamcast to death, but by the end of its lifespan, it sold just a little over 10 million consoles. And the original Xbox, where Shenmue 2 ended up, at least in Europe and North America, it never got released in Japan, funny enough. By the time that game was released, the original Xbox had sold less than 500,000 consoles. So it was foregone conclusion the game was not going to sell enough copies. But if you've been following the Amazon pre-orders, I mean, that game is killing it, and I hope it stays successful. So that's just a little side thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about with this story, I know I'm kind of all over the place today, Far Cry 5. So I finally got through Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 is another one that I've been to multiple events for. Ubisoft brought me out. They brought me out. I mean, I can tell this story now, at least some of this. Over a year ago, I think it was early April of 2017. I get a message from them saying hey, we're doing a thing in New York where we're going to announce a game to journalists. Do you want to be there? And I was like, I'm not a journalist. And they're like, oh, we know, but do you want to go? And I was like, all right, what's the game? They're like, well, we can't tell you. That's the whole point. And I was like, all right, fine. So they bring me out to New York, and I go to this hotel, and I just go in this room. Now, I'm not used to this scenario, because usually when I go to these events, they're bigger things with more people. This was very, very small. It was myself and Hip Hop Gamer, if you guys know him. He and I go way back. He and I are there. We're the only 2 YouTubers. And then everyone else is USA Today, New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, all these big publications, real news reporters. And then just Hip Hop Gamer and me for some reason. And it was weird because we're sitting there and they give us this whole presentation basically being we're doing Far Cry 5 and here's all this stuff. And they told us a lot about it, really early on. We knew the plot line. We knew all that stuff way early. They showed us early trailers and all that stuff, and they also they had the director of the game there, and he told us this story that I cannot tell you because it's still NDA, but basically what the inspiration for the game was. And so that was the first exposure to it. Then at E3, I got to play the demo. I captured it a few times. At PAX West, I played it a few times. Then I went to 2 separate events in San Francisco for it, including this amazing event they did on a ranch. I've shown footage of that. We're actually hung out with Greg, the guy who plays the father. I even have this cool photo of us, where he's blessing me into his cult. That was such a fucking cool event. Of all events I've ever been to, man, that one might still be the top. It's either that or Sega Fest, but those 2 were damn. Point is, I've had a lot of history with Far Cry 5, but I finally got to sit down and actually play the completed game. And I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, there's certain things I didn't like as much about it compared to Far Cry 4 and Primal. I preferred Far Cry 4's map system. I know people get sick about the whole towers thing, but I really enjoyed the way that Far Cry Primal and 4, when you took down a tower, the cloud dissipated and you just had that whole area unlocked. I didn't really like in Far Cry 5 how you kind of had to like go manually wander everywhere to like unlock those areas. I know that, I mean, they even told us this at events. I mean, Far Cry 5, one of the big themes was exploration and just kind of making the world yours. So I get why they did it. I just, as a game mechanic, I didn't enjoy as much. And the game, maybe it's just me, but it felt smaller in scale. Maybe that was because Far Cry 4 was my first introduction to that series, and it just felt so much bigger. I'm not sure. But Far Cry 5 to me felt smaller, even though it probably actually wasn't. And overall, I enjoyed the storyline. I enjoyed all that stuff. It was a blast. I had a lot of fun with it. Not too much I would even change about it. I really, really enjoyed it. I know a lot of people hate the ending of that game. So this is where we go full spoilers. If you don't want to talk about the ending of Far Cry 5, if you haven't played it, you just skip to the next point. But yeah, Far Cry 5, the ending involves you basically losing. You get two choices, one of which is to do nothing and one of which is to resist Joseph, the father. Now, I didn't try the version where you don't resist him. I'm guessing that's the gag choice where, something happens, then the credits roll, and then you just have to redo it. I'm guessing is how that goes. Because the game actually has the same feature at the beginning. You're supposed to go arrest Joseph. The game wants you to arrest him, but if you actually do nothing, there's some slightly different dialogue, and the police just leave, and then the game ends. Kind of like Far Cry 4 had the gag ending at the beginning, right at the beginning of the game. Same thing. But when you do the ending you're supposed to do, which is resist him, you fight him, and ultimately you defeat him, you think, but then a nuclear weapon goes off, and it basically wipes out the area. You survive with just him. You and Joseph survive in Dutch's bunker on Dutch's Island. And so the villain wins. Now, I was talking to my girlfriend about this. She fucking loved the ending. She was like, that's amazing that they did that. They actually had the villain win. I think that's cool as hell. I understand why that's not satisfying in the classical sense. You're with your protagonist and your protagonist loses. But I think that's going to start being more of a thing. Like, this is Infinity War spoilers. Skip past this if you don't want to watch Infinity War. If you haven't seen Infinity War, whatever. Marvel's and Avengers Infinity War. Spoilers. Okay, so Infinity War ends with Thanos basically winning. I'm thinking that that's going to be the new thing for a little bit. For the next 5-10 years, I think you're going to see more stories where the villain wins. Not in all cases, but I think you're going to see more of that, where they try to satisfy you with the villain winning. And then I think that's going to get tired. And we're going to get to a point where they start mixing it up. So you're going to start having more movies where the villain wins or the hero wins, and you legit don't know which one is coming. That'll be a very interesting little phase of cinema and storytelling if that happens, where you're actually getting to a point where you can't really predict who is going to win the fight in a movie. Because, let's face it, you go into any movie these days, you generally are pretty safe to assume that, oh yeah, Captain America's probably going to beat the bad guy. You know what I mean? Superman's probably going to win the fight. You know what I mean? You just kind of know it going in, but you're fine with it. But with the success of Avengers Infinity War and the success of Far Cry 5, and I'm sure there's going to be more examples, I wouldn't be surprised if you see more of that. Just more times where the villain wins until eventually, like I said, I think that's going to get tired, and then we're going to have this cool phase there for maybe a couple of years where you're just like, I don't know who the fuck's going to win this story. I'm calling it now. I think that's going to be a thing. But in short, really liked Far Cry 5, and of course still love BioShock all these years later. So there you go. Let's move on to the next subject, which is just a little blurb. The Incredibles 2 and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. There's nothing for me really to say about them yet because I have not seen them. At the time I record this, they're not out. But by the time the most of you hear this, they will have been out. So by the time most of you hear this, I will have seen them, I'm sure. And I hope I enjoyed them. So I have to rewatch Incredibles, and I probably will sit down and rewatch all the Jurassic Park movies just to do it. Even though I've seen both of those movies enough that I really could go in blind, it would be fine. but I'll probably just do it just to do it. I hope they were good, and I'll give reviews next month, but that's, I guess, just a reminder to you guys if you're interested in those franchises. However, with Jurassic, if you're interested in that franchise and you didn't know it, there is actually another Jurassic Park movie that exists just on this channel, and that might sound very self-serving, because it kind of is, but at the same time, it's not. It's Jurassic Park the Game by Telltale. I took the game and I cut it together into a cohesive film. And I know you must be thinking like, oh no, it's just like a Let's Play. No, it goes way beyond that. Just go check it out. It takes place during the first movie and after. It's like, I call it Jurassic Park 1.5. Check it out. If you like the Jurassic Park's, franchise and stories, that's a pretty cool thing to see. I would recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because I actually was the one who cut it together. I would say that anyway. So we'll move on. Next up, Deadpool 2. Now, this is a movie I have seen, so if you haven't seen it, this will be ripe with spoilers. I'm just going to give thoughts. So yeah, last warning if you haven't seen it. Deadpool 2, pretty cool movie. I'm very curious to see, because I know that the production of this movie was kind of troubled. I know the Disney acquisition of Fox, which is still in process at this point, did have some impact on this, including certain reshoots. Also a lot of last minute changes to Ryan Reynolds' dialogue because he's wearing the mask. They can do that. So there's a lot of, very, very heavy references to the MCU and other things, because eventually, if all things play out as they're supposed to, Deadpool will be the only character of the Fox universe, which was like the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. Of course, that version of the Fantastic Four will never be seen again, but the Fox X-Men universe and Deadpool will be the only thing of that to survive and be integrated into the MCU if all plans play out correctly. Marvel Cinematic Universe being, of course, where Captain America and Thor and Iron Man and all that stuff are. And he's unique in that ability because literally only he as a character, unless there's some other comic book character I'm unaware of, which is very, very possible, he is the only one who could actually jump franchises and have it seem like a plot point, because of his nature of breaking the fourth wall. I mean, that was already a thing with Deadpool in the comics and in the first two movies. So for them to actually make that leap from franchise to another franchise, it was unbelievably fitting. So I hope that actually happens. Although supposedly the next one's going to be Deadpool X-Force, not Deadpool 3, or just a movie called X-Force. We'll see how that plays out. The Disney merger will screw with that, I'm sure. But overall, I really liked that movie. I know a lot of people were saying that they enjoyed the first one more. I enjoyed both of them a lot. It's the movie's plot line is not the most, unique or original thing, but it's just, as long as you're into the comedy side of it, it has a lot of good jokes, and it's a fun watch. It's not the most memorable comic book movie. It's kind of exactly what I wanted in a Deadpool sequel. I got more of that character being that character, having more of his adventure being that character, and trying to make that life with himself. Obviously there is the internal drama of, him basically losing his wife, which he works on fixing there. That's largely the point of the movie, as well as I like the idea that there's a serious villain in Cable, which is also played by Josh Brolin, who they have a whole lot of Thanos jokes about, which is pretty funny because he played Thanos. Overall, I just really enjoyed that movie, and I always have a thing for time travel movies when they're done well. It'll be very, very interesting though to see how that eventually plays into all that MCU stuff. I'm very curious. I mean, that's more honestly where my interest is, because with the movie itself, I really didn't have that many complaints. I just overall enjoyed it. I wish I had some really deep point about it, but I don't. I enjoyed the film, and if you liked the first one, I think you would enjoy the second one. So that's really all I have to say about that. And so our last subject here is the new Star Wars film Solo. So if you haven't seen it, this is also going to be pretty intense with spoilers and stuff. Now I have to say, this is funny. I've seen this movie 3 times now. 3 times. Not intentionally. So here's what happened with me. I went to, if you guys don't know, Sega brought me out to New York in the middle of May for the Sega Genesis re-release collection event. Basically, I was in a competition with multiple people. I lost. Well, I can tell that story another time if anybody cares. But I was in this competition, and afterwards, a lot of us went to go hang out. And Sega actually just last minute, like a bunch of dudes at Sega were like, yeah, let's go see Solo, because it came out that night. So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. They want to take us out to go see Solo. I'm totally down for that. So we went to, I think it was the AMC in Times Square, New York. So think about how popular that would have to be. This is the opening night of a Star Wars movie in Times Square, New York City. That theater should be packed. It wasn't. There was like 12 people in there, and like 8 of us were from the whole Sega thing. It was a ghost town, and I was like, this movie's gonna bomb. And sure enough, it has been bombing. It has not been doing well. But you know, what's funny is that was not how I was supposed to see it. The next day, I was supposed to go back to Chicago and then up to Madison, Wisconsin, because I was supposed to be in Madison to record a podcast talking about this movie. In fact, I had already pre-purchased a ticket to see it in Madison with those people. So I went up there and I was like, all right, I guess I'm watching this again. Saw it again, did the podcast, and that's unfortunately why I have a lot less to say about it, because I kind of did ranting about it for 2 hours already, but we'll get back to that. And then later, I'm finally back in Chicago. My girlfriend is here, and she's a big Star Wars fan, like big time. Like, I like Star Wars. She loves Star Wars. It's a different level. And like, we went to Star Wars Celebration a couple of years ago in London, and everyone's like, oh, why'd you drag her to that? I'm like, I didn't. She wanted to go to that. I was her +1, you know what I mean? Like, I just followed her around. So she wanted to see this, even though she knew she was going to hate it, because that's Star Wars. But basically, she was like, all right, let's go see it. So I was like, all right. So then we go to the theater and saw it a third fucking time. And I'm like, I've seen Solo 3 times. I've seen Infinity War once. Something's wrong with the universe. But let's talk about the actual movie. Like, I've said so much about it in my Patreon podcast on GSP. If you're a Patreon backer there, you can get that one too. But that movie, in short, I didn't hate it. I just couldn't separate myself from all the drama that I know existed behind the scenes of its production. And all the same things I've been saying since the onset of that movie was basically like, we just don't need this movie. Like, no one is really clamoring for a Solo film. I mean, we really don't need it, especially because it's fundamentally broken just by base concept. You can't replace Harrison Ford. It's an impossible task. And the guy they got to do it was, I mean, when you see the behind the scenes of how he was even cast, is really bad. Like, I'm sorry, he was just really bad. I know a lot of people are disputing that. Some people like him, saying, oh, you know, he has a different type of charm to him. It's like, if this was not that character, sure, maybe, but it is. And it's not even that character like a year after the events of Revenge of the Sith. It's supposedly like right before A New Hope. So he's supposed to look like fucking Harrison Ford. I could have accepted if that was like, oh, he's 10 years younger. Sure. I mean, there's a little breaking of suspension of disbelief, but fine. I'll kind of roll with it. But no, not really. And then just as a performer, he really didn't have it. You know who I really liked, though, was Donald Glover. I thought he did a fantastic job of impersonating Billy Dee Williams. And that's really what you were supposed to do. I know that sounds like a bad acting note because, you know, you're supposed to let actors find their own voice and find their own personality and all that. But the problem is when you're making a film like that and they have to match another character, they should do it competently. They should do it well. The dude who played Solo kind of looked like a young Harrison Ford. Not really, but he sounded absolutely nothing like him. Whereas Donald Glover didn't look a whole lot like Billy Dee Williams, but he sounded a lot like him. And to be honest, that worked better in making me believe it's the same character. So I give that props. There's so much shit I could say about this movie that I've already said, but one thing I really like, I like this movie didn't hit you over the head with fan service. As much as I loved Rogue One, that is actually my favorite of the 4 Disney Star Wars movies. There were groaner moments in that movie, like when Ponda Baba, you know, buttface guy, and the other dude see our main characters on that planet, and they're like, "You'll be careful, you'll be dead." You know, like, we don't need that shit. You don't need that. That's punching you in the face fan service. I liked that this movie had a lot of subtle fan service where it would just mention some Star Wars references just to keep the universe tied together. Like I like that Lando mentioned Felucia, the weird alien planet that we only see briefly in Revenge of the Sith. I like that. I like that they mentioned Bosk as an active bounty hunter. I like that. I like that they mentioned what happened to Aura Singh. That Lando owed money to Aura Singh, and Woody Harrelson's character was successful in defeating her. I like that we got a storyline there with a character we already know, and it wasn't hit you over the head. It was just kind of like something they would talk about. So I like that. I didn't like, I guess fundamentally I didn't like the pointless nature of the film, and I also didn't like that it kind of screwed with certain other things. Like the Imperial March now is canon. That's Darth Vader's like music that you hear in a lot of the movies. So when he goes to the recruitment center, they're playing it, which I'm sure was just a little visual gag that they were like, that'll be funny. But when you think about it, now you have to actually debate in your head, like, so were they just always playing that in the speaker system when Vader came down? Is it canon now? I mean, that's what Star Wars fans do. They overanalyze. We overanalyze. So man, I've said so much about this, so it's hard to even know where to jump into. Let's go with the Darth Maul thing. Darth Maul, of course, shows up in this film. And while I loved that movie, I've seen it 3 times. And objectively, it always takes me out of the movie. And it always does because I can't help but just think about the fact that he's really there. The first time I saw it, I was just like, wow, they put Darth Maul in the movie. And I knew that he was alive. I knew he was alive in the Clone Wars and Rebels. I knew all of that. I was just surprised they actually put him into the feature film. But I couldn't focus on all what he was saying. Second time I saw it, I knew it was coming, but I was too focused on the reactions of the people I was with because they had been talking about things they were expecting to see or whatever. And one of them joked about seeing Darth Maul, literally as a joke, because he thought it was totally impossible. So I was sitting next to him. So when Darth Maul came up, I kind of punched him on the shoulder. I was like, you got it. But it was my own bad. But the third time I saw it, I just started trying to listen to what he was saying and then trying to tie it into the universe in my head. And then, of course, that was my mistake. I missed what he was saying. But mostly he's just talking about, like, how did the plan go down? And, you have to come work for me and all that kind of stuff. But that moment has made me realize something the more I analyze it, which is Star Wars. That was the moment, in hindsight, that was the moment that I guess Star Wars was no longer for me. And I don't mean I don't like Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I'm going to keep watching all the Star Wars stuff. But in that moment, I realized Star Wars is now for a younger generation. And I know we all kind of go through this with Star Wars. Obviously, Star Wars is older than me. There was a generation, all 3 of the original trilogy came out before I was even born. So I grew up with it during the re-release era, the 97 re-release. That's when I was first introduced to it. And then, of course, I had the prequels and all that stuff. But to the older fans, Star Wars is that trilogy, and then all the stuff after is just kind of weird stuff that's technically canon, but whatever. You just look at it as like this weird thing. And then there's, as you get to the younger groups, Star Wars becomes more of a bigger entity. But up until this film, all of the films basically functioned within a very understood set of rules, meaning the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, they were leading towards a thing, which was basically the original trilogy. That was the whole point of them. The original trilogy were fun adventure films that existed on their own. And then you got the shows like Clone Wars and Rebels and all that stuff, but they were kind of like unnecessary to watch. Even though they're good and they're canon, they were unnecessary. And then the new Disney ones, like they're supposed to continue the story. Force Awakens continues it. Last Jedi continues it. Rogue One interjects inside of a story everyone already knows because they've all seen A New Hope. But Solo, in that moment, told you need to have seen Clone Wars and Rebels for this movie to make sense to you now. You need to have seen it, because if you haven't, the last time you saw Darth Maul was him getting cut in half in Phantom Menace and you believing he was dead. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, as far as actual time goes in the big screen, because that's when Phantom Menace came out, basically 20 years ago, you look at it and go, what the fuck is that redheaded dude doing back? What's up with that? That objectively takes you out. And when you're there and you don't know that background stuff, you just kind of go, wow, Star Wars isn't for me anymore. And keep in mind, I have actually seen those shows. But what he's talking about is like a reference to a very specific timeline, I think, of Rebels specifically, that the kids are all going to get, because they've watched Rebels a lot. They've watched Clone Wars a lot. So to them, it's all Star Wars. It's all just one ongoing big thing. Whereas to different generations, it's broken down into different brackets, as I explained before. So that was the moment I realized Star Wars, I'm officially too old for it. I'm going to keep watching it, don't get me wrong. But like now, knowing the back lore stuff is actually way more important than it ever was before. Does that make any sense to you guys? That was basically what I came away with the Darth Maul scene. And I've asked multiple people about it who have never watched Rebels or never watched Clone Wars, and every single person says it totally took them out of the movie because they couldn't figure out why he was alive or what that was all about, except for younger kids. At least the reviews I've read online, some kids will post about it and stuff, and then they'll all say they loved it because it's just like, hey, there he is, and then it's connecting. So it's a generational thing, or at least to people who have definitely. I mean, like the first time I saw the dude I was sitting next to at Sega, he knew all of the backstory stuff, and he was totally into it. So I mean, he wasn't a kid, but to him it wasn't weird. He was a super fan, so it's the same type of thing in a sense because you both have the same amount of information. And a super fan is going to know all that stuff and is just going to not be taken out of it at all. They're just going to be excited that, oh, there's Darth Maul. That's cool. I mean, I knew he was alive, so that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Is that any of that following? So aside from that, I've said so much more about this movie on the other podcast, but overall, I didn't hate it. It was fine. You know, it'll be a piece that you watch in a marathon, but like I really have no reason to like actively go see it by itself again. I would do it as part of a Star Wars marathon whenever I sit down and watch all of them in order. If I were to make a couple of changes, one thing I know I mentioned that I'm glad they didn't throw in too much fan service, but one thing I wish they had done was there's that battle scene where Solo is he's working for the Empire. He's on that mudball planet. He's shooting at stuff. What I really wish we'd have seen there is, it was all dark and there was a lot of silhouettes of figures fighting in the background. I would really love it if there was just one shot of a whole bunch of silhouettes of stormtroopers and stuff like charging at something, and they're led by a cloaked black figure with a red lightsaber just cutting motherfuckers down. It's obviously Darth Vader, but you don't see him. There's no close-up shot. There's no random shot of Harrison Ford. It's how much he should be Solo. There's no random shot of Solo like looking over there being like, whoa, that guy is scary and intimidating. Like, you don't need a direct connection like that. You don't throw it in the fan's face. Just a subtle background reference, because in Star Wars timeline stuff, that's exactly what Vader was doing around then, is he was pacifying planets by going around and basically killing any sort of resistance to the Empire. So seeing him back there would have been a really cool excuse to basically have a lightsaber in there. That way when Darth Maul is in that scene later, he didn't randomly have to like show his lightsaber for no reason, because if you guys weren't aware, that's the only part of the entire film with a lightsaber, is when Darth Maul does that. I would have preferred that. Plus then you would have had Darth Vader and Darth Maul technically in the same film, which would have been kind of cool. However, that did not happen. That would have been one little thing. The beginning, one suggestion I would have made for that is, I really liked at the beginning how they kind of established like this is a rogue time. Nobody really knows what's going on, but they could have phrased it better. Disney has a serious wording problem with these crawls. Not that this one had a crawl in the formal sense of Star Wars, but they seem to have an issue with being able to just word something quite right to set stuff up. I bitched about that a lot in Force Awakens, how that one failed to establish the state of the galaxy very, very, very poorly. This one could have used a slight rewording to just make it much more clear where we are. Because if this was right after the events of Revenge of the Sith, logically, it would be a chaotic time, because the Empire is still in its growing pains days trying to figure out how to control all this shit. And so there would be a lot of like Wild West type of outlaws. So that made sense. Plus it would have worked perfectly with the whole explanation of like why Solo would be so much younger and all that stuff. You could have done it perfectly, except for the one logistical issue there is that I think Solo would have been like about 11 years old around then. So you would have had to work on exactly where that is. Maybe you make him more like, 20, because I think he was like 35 as a character in A New Hope. I honestly don't remember. So I think that would have, with a slight little bit of word tweaking there to really place him in a specific spot in the universe, would have been better. And it would have kind of kept the ties stronger. So there you go. I was watching a review of this movie, and people pointed out, and I wish I could take credit for this, but I can't because it wasn't me. People are pointing out that certain things like the whole Darth Maul stuff probably is Disney's way of starting to tie things together with a lot of these like independent Star Wars movies. I'm trying to build, I mean, it's obviously been trying to build a Star Wars cinematic universe. That's a thing, we know. But they're trying to find ways to spin it off other than just, here's a story you didn't see right before a different movie, and here's a sequel that will disappoint everybody. They're trying to find characters that we like and see more of their stories to build them all up to something. The problem is, and one of the dudes that I was hanging out with at Sega said this, the problem is you're building up to nothing. Because the Star Wars series is so all out of order that it doesn't really matter when you're watching Solo. You're like, it can't really build to anything because we know everything that happened after this movie. So we know his entire plot line. We even know how he dies. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need this story. So the only way you can do that is if you're doing stories that take place after Last Jedi. But since Last Jedi was in of itself such a clusterfuck, it's kind of hard. I know that Solo's tanking has publicly made Disney say, hey, you know, we're going to reevaluate our situation here. Personally, if they were to throw me the reins where they are right now, I would start, first of all, I would try to correct a lot of the mistakes that Last Jedi did in any option available to you. Meaning, a lot of people really didn't like that Rey came from nothing. They didn't like... there were just so many things they didn't fucking like about it. I would start trying to make other movies to compensate for some of those mistakes. Like, for example, I'll give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Last Jedi, Kylo Ren basically straight up just tells Rey, like, your parents were junkers. They sold you for drinking money. You were nothing, blah, blah, blah. He could be lying, and that's what a lot of people have thrown out there. Like, you could make her more significant. So then you do a whole movie to verify that significance. And what I mean by that is, what's the one individual standalone film I've been talking about for a while that I'd love to see? The Obi-Wan movie. I'd love to see a standalone Obi-Wan movie, which at this point seems all but greenlit. Ewan McGregor's age appropriate. He wants to do it. It fits right in the wheelhouse of what they've been trying to do. And it's a perfect timeline thing. And so what you could do is have this story where he's on Tatooine. He's basically given up the Jedi Order, and he's going through a dark phase. I mean, this dude has the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders, you know, all that stuff. I mean, he's essentially responsible for all this, and he doesn't know Vader is alive, and that's where he finds that out. There could be a dark, gritty Star Wars movie to that, like the fallen monk, if you will. And in that, he could have a moment of weakness, because Jedi are not, they're basically like, they're sexually repressed. I mean, that's partially what led Anakin to being insane. But he could kind of go along the same route where he basically, because in the Clone Wars, he actually, and I think Rebels as well, Obi-Wan did actually have a brief relationship with this other girl. So it's not like he's not open to that possibility. But what if he actually goes somewhere with that in that darker of times and has an offspring? Doesn't even know about it necessarily. It happens on its own. And eventually that offspring, they tell us through the film in some way that that's the lineage of Rey. Or you find that out in the next, episode 9. Though, granted, episode 9 will come out before Obi-Wan, so I don't know how that would work exactly. But that's the problem with doing too many of these movies too quickly, is you're screwing with your ability to make decisions and corrections. You can't course correct that fast. But that's just an example of what I'm talking about. I'd love to see them tie universes together like that. I remember when Rogue One was coming out, a lot of people thought that Rogue One was going to try to answer some of the questions presented in Force Awakens, which timeline-wise wouldn't seem to make sense. But I think it was actually Matt Pat who threw out this theory that what was going to be interesting was that he thought the Rogue One characters were going to be the Knights of Ren. We introduced the Knights of Ren in Force Awakens, and then you see there's 5 of them, and they all have different body armors and stuff. He actually even compared it to all the armor and attire that the Rogue One characters are wearing. And he threw out this whole plot line about, like, wouldn't it be interesting if the Rogue One was the introduction of these characters, and then we saw what they did and why they either had regret for it, why they changed their minds, whatever they did. And then at the end of the movie, maybe they go off in bitterness, even though they helped in this incident, they disagree with what they ultimately did or something like that. And then in episode 8, we would have seen them come back much older, and they're the Knights of Ren. And you see what I'm saying? Like, you can build connections and have it still work within your lore, but you have to actually do that part, and you can't just make, like, weird references. Oh, look, Darth Maul is alive. You know what I mean? So I'd love to see more stuff like that, but it became very apparent after Last Jedi, especially when Rian Johnson publicly said it, there is no plan for Star Wars. They don't have an overarching concept of where they're going with this. Disney more or less looked at it like, we put out a movie, we make like a couple $2 billion. Just keep making whatever you got. And Kathleen Kennedy had this, I mean, people have given her a lot of shit, but the thing is, it's not really all her fault. Yes, she's ultimately greenlit a lot of parts of it, but at the same time, she's under incredible pressure from Disney to get a Star Wars movie out every single year. A Star Wars film in production is not an easy thing to do, especially because if you guys know anything about the history of Star Wars, George tried to do that. He tried to get other filmmakers to make Star Wars movies, and he had the hardest time doing it because Star Wars is so big as an entity, a lot of directors don't want to touch it. So the ones you get are the ones that are super eager but don't necessarily know what they're doing. Rian Johnson. And so J.J. Abrams was meant to come in and kind of calm that situation. And then now he has to come in and recalm that situation. But if you look at all the production of all the Star Wars movies under the Disney era, every single one of them, other than Force Awakens, had massive production troubles and had to switch directors part of the way through the film. And that includes the new one. At one point, that was being done by the guy who did Jurassic World. He was supposed to do episode 9, and he's out and in favor of J.J. Abrams. So like every single one of them has gone through this. Gareth Edwards at one point was replaced during Rogue One and then brought back, and they had another director in between. Obviously that happened with Solo. Yeah, so a whole lot of stuff with that. So we're pretty much done here. I just want to say one last thing about Solo before I go. And again, if you want way more information on it, you can check out my GSP Patreon podcast too. But the last thing I want to say is this happened. I read about this the other day, at least at the time I record this, and it annoyed the shit out of me, was the way that Solo was greenlit. There's a joke in there, and it annoys me because it's a joke that is canon now. There is a joke about how Solo got his last name. He's just called Han up until that point. He registers for the Empire, and they say, "All right, Han, what?" And he's like, "I don't know. I don't have a last name, basically." And the guy's like, "Well, who are your people? Where do you come from?" He's like, "I don't come from anywhere. I'm alone." He's like, "Alone? Solo. Han Solo." So the fucking Imperial gives him his name based off of just a joke. And that was annoying and a groaner in the theater, and really just like, oh, why? That's awful. Why would you do that? It turns out Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, actually greenlit the movie based on that line. I'm serious. And it's like, oh, no. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on it for now. I know that in previous years I did, after every single Star Wars movie under the Disney era, I've actually come back and done a live show just wanting to talk about it. But with Solo, I just really didn't feel motivated to do that, which I think tells you a lot about that movie. That, and I really wouldn't have had the logistical opportunity to do it anyway, so it really doesn't make a difference. But yeah, man, I think that's it. I think there might have been one other thing I wanted to say about Solo, but I'm suddenly spacing on what it was. So, oh no, there is the one last thing I can remember. I was in the groups I was in. Maybe you guys saw this coming. I was the only person in every group I've seen it with, because I've seen it now with 3 different groups of people. Which was that L3, the droid, whose name by the way is L33T. That's an older reference. When they said, there's this part where she's walking around and Lando's walking with her, and then Han's with them, and he says something about like, I would actually get her mind wiped, but the problem is she has like the best navigational coordinates in the galaxy. I was like, oh, she's gonna die and she's gonna be integrated into the ship. I saw it at that moment, which is exactly what happens. Apparently nobody I was with ever saw that coming, so I know if people knew that. The reason I knew that was coming, as soon as he said that, in Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon can't actually physically be faster than any other ship. It's not possible because it's light speed. So what makes it faster is its navigational system is able to coordinate jumps infinitely faster than anybody else's, because it simply has the best in there. And the other thing is, there's a line in Empire Strikes Back where C-3PO is trying to communicate with the Millennium Falcon, and he says something about like, where is R2 when I need him? Han, or Mr. Solo, Captain, I don't know what he says exactly, but he says something like, I don't know where your ship learned to communicate, but it has the strangest dialect, basically showing that the ship is kind of nutty, which the droid was. And so I think that I was like, oh, all right, you combine those 2 pieces of information. It's like, okay, there we go. She's going to be part of the ship. Plus, as a character, she isn't in anything else. So obviously something's going to happen to her. It also would, it's interesting when I will say this for Solo. It does create new dynamics to the original trilogy. especially the Empire, because it gives you more of a understanding of what actually happened between Han and Lando in their past. It also makes Lando's attachment to the Millennium Falcon, especially because L3 is still in it, more personal. It also, one thing I actually did like, and I'll give them credit for this, credit to Ron Howard, I assume, was the fact that in this movie, in Solo, Lando calls Han. He always calls him Han. Now, the reason he does that in this movie is it's meant to be belittling. It's a joke. It's like, I know your name, but I'm going to say the wrong name to insult you and put you down, just to have a character dynamic between us. That was fucking genius. And you're like, no, he called him that in the original trilogy. Yes, but that's not why. In the original trilogy, he called him that because Billy D. Williams, by his own admission, not an actor. He was basically like a popular, I think he was a model. I'm not entirely certain what his background was, but I know he wasn't an actor. And if you go back and watch like deleted scenes of him, he can't remember his lines. Even like in the commentary and stuff, they said working with Billy D. Williams was kind of a pain in the ass because he could not remember dialogue to save his life. So a lot of his shots are very short burst. And he just kind of says what he has to say, and a lot of the time he would fuck it up. And if they just got a solid take of any kind, they would use it. That's why he says Han all the time, because it's like, no, it's Han, but he said Han correctly in this take, but he didn't finish the line, so it's like, fuck it, get the one where he finished the line, even if he said Han. There's moments in Jedi where he does the same thing, where he says, he's talking about the Millennium Falcon, he says, she won't get a scratch. He says he screws up that line. There's all sorts of deleted scenes and all that stuff of just him trying to get dialogue out, and he's like, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. It's actually very surreal. So I like how they took an old mistake and fixed it. That's a good example of world building, and they did it in the best way possible by also using it as character motivation for those two characters to kind of butt heads. That was fucking genius, and I'll give full credit to Ron Howard because I assume that was his idea, because that was smart. But anyway, with that, we're going to head out here. So thank you very much to all of you for listening, especially to those of you on Patreon who got early access to this, and to every one of you Patreon backers who are involved in this. That, of course, would be Kyle Vaughn for sponsoring a specific subject, as well as our shout-outs once again would be Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Eric Parellas, Trey Wagner, Tim Inman. Thank you to all of you, and thank you all for listening. I will see you all later.